Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook. You recognize the names. They're dismal landmarks in our national debate about gun violence. But they have one other thing in common. They are also the names of schools where someone opened fire and destroyed the lives and the futures of our nation's most important resource, our young people. In Boston last month, we were reminded again how hard it is to guarantee the safety of public spaces. We're all called to be extra vigilant, to say something when we see something. But schools are, or they should be, controlled environments. By their nature, they are sanctuaries, places where only those who have a right to be there, students, teachers, administrators, are allowed in. We may not be able to do anything about controlling gun violence, but our schools demand from us a special degree of attention. Can we at least make them safer? To help us answer that question, we've invited some special guests to Criminal Justice Matters today. Jim Mulvaney is an adjunct professor in law, police science, and criminal justice administration at John Jay College. He's also a Pulitzer-Prize winning journalist who has worked for publications such as Newsday and the New York Daily News. Last month, he wrote a widely read op-ed piece on one of the more provocative school safety ideas out there, the National Rifle Association's proposal to arm teachers. Jim, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So your op-ed piece got a lot of justified, widely deserved attention around the country. What's wrong with the NRA's idea to put more guns in teachers' hands? I mean, it seems logical.
I don't know that it seems logical. I would say there's a couple of big flaws. The first flaw is the NRA's view is the claim that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. I'm a good guy, you're a good guy. Neither of us would be very effective in an armed combat situation. I'm a good shot, put me on the range and I can bang out lots of bullseyes. Put me in a combat position, I'm not trained for that.
Yeah, but if the bad guys knew that teachers had guns, wouldn't that be sort of a deterrent?
It could be a deterrent, but think about the NYPD, who are among the most trained police in the United States. A lot of them are trained here. Their average hit rate is 36%. That means every time that they fire their weapons, or each weapon incident, they miss 2 out of 3 shots. Think about a teacher who, according to the NRA, would get 40 hours of training as opposed to 13 weeks of training NYPD would get. Do we really want that many loose bullets flying around schools?
Well, but there are some school boards in some particularly rural areas of the country where they've already said to teachers, we're training you to have guns, and in fact you're obligated to wear guns to school.
And that creates all kinds of legal difficulties because police officers, law enforcement officials, federal agents have a legal requirement to act. How can you make teachers act? Should a teacher go through all that training? Should a teacher be required to carry a gun and shoot, especially if they're not trained?
There is a point that's also made that if law enforcement takes too long to get there, one school district said they estimated it would be about 15 minutes between the time of hearing about a case, an alarm, and the time they get to the school. That 15 minutes could be crucial. Wouldn't the gun in the teacher's hands make a difference?
Absolutely, and if we had fully trained security officers, security resource officers, as the NRA calls them, in schools, that might be a good thing. But we all know what the economics of education is today. We're asking kids to bring in notebooks and toilet paper. What kind of security guards are we going to hire? I mean, schools are going to pay less than McDonald's. Do we really want someone with that little training to be the only thing that stands between our children and a lunatic?
Well, let's talk about the issue of armed guards, trained armed guards in schools. I think the number has gone to about 40% since 2% in 2008. And there are issues with that, about that they don't just look for kids with guns, but they look for kids with disciplinary problems.
Certainly.
Is there something wrong with that?
Well, I mean, there are a number of architectural things that one can do to try to keep armed people out of schools. There's an awful lot of schools now that have man traps, meaning that you walk in the front door, the door closes behind you before the inside door opens. So if someone walks in and there's a security guard sitting somewhere else in the building, he can see in the camera a guy with a gun. He just locks both doors and the guy is trapped. There are schools that I've been to as part of my past life with the Division of Human Rights where they had metal detectors and bag x-rays, Hempstead High School. And I remember seeing that, thinking this seems kind of over the top to have bag x-rays at a high school.
Over the top.
And the fourth bag that went through had a machete in it. That I understand. There were police officers there, so there was somebody there to handle it. But once you're inside the school, you can't. Municipalities can't afford to have police wandering the halls, and it's probably not the proper environment for a child.
There are a substantial number of cops now in our schools, our public schools.
Yes, there are.
In New York City and elsewhere.
Well, in New York City, it's mostly public safety officers. It's not sworn cops. These are not armed officers. And one of the things that we see is we're changing the whole disciplinary paradigm from the usual that we went through as children. I'm sure that you may have stayed after school once or twice for suspension, as opposed to if you have a confrontation with a person in a uniform, now all of a sudden you're facing a criminal charge. I mean, that's really not what we want for our kids. It's not a good environment to learn in.
But still, in the environment we live in now, again, speaking in terms of a deterrent function, if you knew there were armed guards or retired cops or off-duty cops in schools, wouldn't that be a kind of warning signal to anybody?
Think about who these people are. Think about the people who went into Newtown. Think about the people who went to Columbine. You're assuming that they're going to logically think this through. These are lunatics. And if you think from their point of view, I don't know that this becomes a deterrent. They haven't thought it out completely. And in terms of retired cops, if they're retired, why are they retired? We give them a pension because they're too old to function. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to put them in the most dangerous place. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me.
There are instances in some schools, I'm thinking of the schools in Texas, where cops on the scene or retired or security guards on the scene have actually improved the disciplinary situation in the school. Now, that may be a whole different topic of discussion, but the idea itself of having some sort of disciplinary uniformed or non-uniformed presence there.
I would say that they probably don't have a school discipline problem in North Korea. Is that what we're looking for? Do we really want an armed man asking someone if they've done their homework?
So what would you say to the NRA in both counts?
I would say the NRA, the document that they produced was actually quite helpful in terms of a lot of the non-gun stuff. The architecture was very important, talking about man caves and things like that. A lot of the warning systems that they propose, also very important. A lot of where you put new schools, put them near police stations. So you're not looking at 15 minutes, you're looking at 2 or 3 minutes.
Well, how serious is the problem? I mean, I took a look at some of the history, and over the last 15 years, there have been about 75 school shootings around the world, about 250 victims. That's a lot, but it's still a rare case. So it's something that we really need to worry about seriously?
If you have kids, that changes the whole. It becomes not numbers, but it becomes your child.
Jim, thanks for coming by.
Thanks for having me.
When it comes to school safety, we think about the obvious things that we do to protect our homes. Locking doors and windows, setting up surveillance systems, hiring security guards. But the shooter at Sandy Hook got inside by shooting out a locked window. So what happens then? Glenn Stanton and Michael Taylor have given this worst-case scenario a lot of thought. And they've come up with a training manual for teachers and school administrators that they say can save lives. Both men have years of security experience behind them. Glenn spent 27 years at the FBI, including as chief firearms instructor and as head sniper of the New York SWAT team. Mike is a former agent with the Naval Criminal Intelligence Service, and he's provided protection to U.S. government VIPs, such as President George Bush Sr. Both men got their start as cops in New Jersey, where they recently formed a school consultancy called Point Safety Education. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
So, Glenn, let me start with you. What led you to start Point Safety?
Well, we felt that in light of all the school shootings that have been happening over the last decade or so, we felt that there was a need to educate teachers regarding firearms threats and how to deal with them. We felt that this was sadly lacking in the school systems. All the police departments, their response is how they will respond to an armed threat in a school, but there's very little done for the teachers.
So is this a better idea than giving teachers guns or putting armed guards in schools, or is it a companion?
It's a companion. It's a different idea. It's whether you had an armed guard in a school or not, you would still need this type of training, because if you're the unfortunate one that has an armed assailant come into your classroom, you have to know how to deal with that.
Do you have any feeling about whether we should be arming teachers or not?
Well, I think if you arm teachers, on first blush it sounds like it might be a good idea, but I also think that, you know, if you're going to give a teacher a weapon, you have to train them. The police, they get an inordinate amount of training regarding firearms. I don't know if teachers would want to go through that. I don't know what the problem would be. Say a teacher failed to pass the firearms course, could they still teach? They could be a great teacher, maybe they can't teach now. A teacher is in the school with a weapon. Where do they secure it? Their backs to the blackboard a lot of times. If there's a confrontation with a student in a school, what's the availability of the student getting a hold of that weapon? If they keep the weapon locked, is it accessible when they need it? There's a lot of things that come into play. Are they under a duty to act? Does that change their job description? I mean, I think there's a lot of things come up regarding arming a teacher in a school.
Have either of you ever dealt with a real case of a school shooter in your long career in law enforcement?
I have not, no.
No, I have not either, no.
So what schools have signed on to your program so far, Mike?
Well, we've done training in New Jersey, in the Trenton area, and we had teachers from Morristown, Piscataway, Hamilton Township. We're currently working with the Petty School in Heightstown, New Jersey, and we just finished meeting with Poly Prep in Brooklyn, New York, that are interested in our program also.
And New York City public schools, have they given any sign that they're interested? Or?
We haven't had anything from them yet, no. Our program's relatively new. We put this together in light of the Sandy Hook shooting, and Glenn and I were discussing how some of these shootings could have went a little differently if the teachers were more educated on how to assess these threats and react to these threats.
But it does, as Glenn says, it takes a teacher who has his or her wits about them. I mean, their first impulse is going to be to save the kids, save the students, and even if you're on a college campus, the same goes for that. So yeah. even aside from whether you ask these teachers to wear guns, even asking them to think about trying to protect themselves against a shooter, that's a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, we have deadly force issues too, not only training in how to use a firearm and to properly shoot a firearm, and now you have deadly force issues, when deadly force is appropriate and when it's not. And a lot of these teachers may not want to carry guns. That's why they became teachers, not police officers.
Can we ever harden schools enough that we can actually prevent a shooter from getting inside? Or is that almost an impossible dream?
I think you hear the term lockdown. Well, lockdown is a term that came out in around 1977, and we talk about this in our training, and that term was used in locking down prisoners inside a prison to make the prison safe by keeping the threats locked in a cell. Now the term is being turned around and used as put the good people and lock a classroom to keep the teachers and the children safe in the classroom, and schools really aren't built for that.
Right.
And
thank God they're not in many ways.
And once teachers are in that lockdown situation, we teach a whole block on what should be going on in that classroom, how to be properly prepared in case that shooter does enter your classroom, and what position to be in, and what steps you can take to deal with that if it happes.
But all that said, you're not really promising 100% protection. I mean,
no.
Nobody can.
Nobody can promise that.
Yeah.
But we can mitigate it greatly. If people have training, they will fall back to their training. People usually think, oh, if a crisis happens, I'll rise to the occasion. Most of the times, people do not rise to the occasion. They fall back on their training. If they were trained to do something in a crisis situation, it gives them a starting point. It gives them a nexus to advance from. If they don't have that and they just hesitate, that's where the real danger lies.
And we think of our training like CPR.
Right.
If you take CPR training and a situation occurs, you have the knowledge to take action. Where if you're in a situation, you're in a school or classroom, and something happens, at least you have the knowledge to make an educated decision in what action to take. And what
Well, I understand you brought some props with you to show us how it can
well,
be
we
done.
brought training weapons. We brought airsoft training weapons that we use in our training.
Well, let's take a look.
Sure.
So we're standing here at a John Jay classroom to simulate what we should be doing or thinking about if a real shooter comes into a classroom and poses a threat. What's the first thing that a teacher needs to do and to think about when he or she hears that the shooter's in the building?
When a teacher hears that a shooter's in the building, they have to assess. The first thing they should do is decide flight or fight. Flight is always preferable. If you can get away, by all means, get away. The way to enhance your flight is the use of distance. The greater the distance, the less likelihood of the shooter being able to actually hit you. The other thing that you can use is concealment. Concealment will not stop bullets, but it will hide you, such as a darkened classroom, behind a curtain. The other option is cover. Cover will not only hide you, but it will also stop a bullet. Examples of cover are walls, books possibly, even desks if they're angled properly.
Okay, so now you brought some weapons to show us in a real-life simulation.
Yes, we
what
did.
should do. So tell us what they are.
Well, these are airsoft weapons. We use these for training teachers because, specifically because the action is exactly like the real weapon. And this gun is a semi-automatic rifle. It's a M16. This is the weapon that was used at Sandy Hook Elementary School by Adam Lanza.
Okay, now let's have you guys show us, and then I'll become the teacher in a moment, how you would actually disarm that weapon if you have a shooter coming in the door.
If an active shooter actually came into the classroom, before you engage the shooter, you'd want to be as close to the shooter as possible. You would want to use some type of distraction. Distraction can be verbalization, it can be looking away, it can be thrown objects. One thing that we highly recommend is a small fire extinguisher. If the teacher is placed right at the door in a lockdown situation and a gunman enters, the teacher can deploy the fire extinguisher, striking the gunman with the chemical powder, which also acts as an irritant, and it acts as concealment. Once that occurs, the person should attempt to engage the weapon and get the muzzle pointed to the ground. You're going to reach out to the end of the muzzle. Once you get that, he will not be able to keep the muzzle up. I'll be able to defeat him here. I can keep the muzzle down. Once I do that, I want to step inside of the person. As I step inside here, since this is an M16 or AR-15 variant, I want to try to release the magazine. I know that there's a magazine release button. I've just hit that. Now if one round goes off, the one round's been fired at the floor, and we have nothing else in the gun.
But that takes incredible presence of mind for a teacher, because your first instinct is going to be to run away the opposite direction and also to protect the kids.
Right. Well, this is protecting the kids. Like I say, if the teacher were to run and use herself as a shield or himself as a shield to protect the children, they'd all be shot anyway.
Which is what many of the teachers did in Sandy Hook.
Right, without the training. But if you can get in here, like I say, you don't have to be able to disarm this person. You just have to be able to disable the gun, and you're just trying to buy seconds or minutes possibly. By coming down on the end of the muzzle, if you can remove the magazine, that's fine. Even if I couldn't remove the magazine, if my hand just came across the chamber here, when the gun was fired, the ejected shell would jam into the chamber right here, effectively making this a one-shot weapon. Once I got to here, if I could remove the magazine, that would be great. Now I'm going to use personal weapons. I can use my feet to scrape the shin, stomp the instep. I can attack the groin. I can attack the eyes. I can put a thumb into the eye. I can rip ears. I can use elbows. Anything, everything. If in the struggle it's close enough, I can reach and bite. Once I've done any or all of these things, I'm just going to hang on to the end of the muzzle. I'm going to holler for help, and I'm going to keep that muzzle pointed in a safe direction.
You're talking really about engaging the shooter, which is not something that, again, is your instinct.
Well, it's not instincts, and that's why training is important. And it's recommended by the Department of Homeland Security that your chances of survival increase greatly if you fight back
And the
as a
Secret
last
Service,
resort.
I understand, also
Yeah,
said.
the Secret Service did a study with the Department of Education.
How much
looking at
training
shooters.
do you actually need? Are we talking about 10 hours, 20 hours, a year? I mean,
Well, we liken our training to CPR, where we're giving you enough knowledge so you can make intelligent decisions if something happens. And our training seminar is about 6 hours.
Okay, well now let's try a real life simulation. I'll be the teacher, and you're going to show me and walk me through how I would actually go about doing this. Let's see if I can. Okay, I've just heard in the school intercom there's a problem. What do I do first? I've got my kids here.
If we have a lockdown situation, the best thing to do is to put your children on the strong side wall, adjacent to the doorway.
And I'm grabbing a fire extinguisher.
And yes, we recommend the use of a fire extinguisher. The children should be as far back as possible into the classroom. The teacher should then approach the threshold of the doorway, armed with the fire extinguisher, and if the assailant's muzzle breaks through the threshold of the door, the teacher should engage with the fire extinguisher and reach to control the muzzle. Right? Keep the muzzle pointed in a downward direction. Use personal weapons to attack the assailant, all the while hollering for help.
Help! I need help here.
Very good.
Good.
Is that Marlon Brando? So Glenn, another part of what you've been saying is that you want to rearrange the schoolroom itself, the classroom itself, to develop sort of maximum security. And one of them involves how you position desks and chairs. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. In a classroom, there are a lot of items that can be used as cover. Okay. Again, what I stated earlier, cover is something that will stop a bullet. We found that a typical classroom desk, when we did a test, we put it at a 90-degree angle at 3 yards, and we fired at it with various handgun and rifle rounds. Invariably, at 3 yards, 90 degrees, everything cleanly penetrated through the desk. We found that taking that same material, and instead of having the desk face 90 degrees, have it face 45 degrees to the shooter.
And I'm going to stand like this, and I'm going to be protected?
As much of your body that's being covered will be protected. At 45 degrees, the bullets, all the handgun rounds skipped off the desk. Shotgun, buckshot, triple O buckshot also skipped off the desk. Rifle rounds penetrated the desk, but again, when you angle it, it decreases the energy there, and even if a round goes through, it may be not as lethal a wound as if there was no protection.
So that's a good point to take away. It's the angle. If you have a desk or some other large
right, any type
table,
of big object, if you can
angle
it, you're going to buy yourself added protection.
Okay, now you also mentioned books can
Yes.
serve as a kind of protective device.
We brought 2 books here today. This is a 2.5-inch book, hardcover. We fired 4 rounds at it. We fired a .22 long rifle. We fired a .45 automatic. We fired a 9mm, and we fired a 38 plus P round at this book. We shot this book again at 90 degrees at 3 yards. We found that once we shot this, nothing penetrated from the rear. Everything was contained in the book. As a matter of fact, most of the rounds didn't penetrate more than half the book. The greatest, you can see when I split the book in half right here, there's no penetration past halfway through the book. So all 4 rounds were stopped in the book itself.
You know what, still, this assumes that we have 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe even a minute of warning because somebody's announced a danger on the intercom system. Now, but what happens if somebody just bursts through the door with no warning? How are you going to react to that?
Basically, like Homeland Security said, this is a bad situation. When you're at ground zero, if someone surprises you, your only way to get out of it is to fight. And what you want to do is react. React as quickly as possible. Before you attack the assailant, use some type of distraction. It can be sound, it can be anything in the air. We recommend anything on the desk that you can throw at the person, you throw. If it's your cell phone, if it's an eraser, if it's books, anything that you have, launch everything in the air at the assailant and immobilize the person.
I can imagine any teacher or educator watching this will say, all right, you guys have had years of experience, years of training to be able to do a split-second reaction like this. Teachers are not going to have that, even with 6 or 10 hours of training.
This is something, I would disagree with you here. This is something that, it's a very simple, we're teaching gross motor skills. We're not teaching anything that's that hard to do. We're giving them the presence of mind. When they come through our class, we do many repetitions with this. They get comfortable with it. Once they have this training down, it's going to be in the back of their mind. And people always think that, oh, in a crisis situation, I'll rise to the occasion. With no training, you won't rise to the occasion. You'll kind of just tread water. You won't really do anything. You'll be kind of stuck. If you've had training, you'll fall back to your training.
It's kind of like being a lifeguard, right? You've got to keep retraining yourself. After a year, you may forget you want to do a
You can do a refresher.
refresher every year or every
That would be good. But the thing is to get that initial understanding, understand how the weapons work, how they fail, and how you can react to disable them.
Glenn, thanks a lot. That's
Thank
very
you.
helpful. Thank you very much.
Right.
It's hard to be neutral about guns, and I won't try. We can disagree about gun control, but when it comes to school safety, the debate gets personal for me. As the father of a third grader, I want schools to be prepared when and if the unthinkable happens. Like Jim Mulvaney, I don't think putting more guns in school is the answer. The ideas of Glenn and Mike make more sense to me, and I hope they get the attention they deserve. But I'd like to hear what you think. Please visit our Facebook page and let us know. I'm Steve Handelman. Thanks for watching. See you next time.